This chapter is chapter 9. Have you ever gotten to a place where you feel like you're in a good place? Like, you're in touch with your purpose, and you feel fulfilled, and you feel like, things are moving, not necessarily like external, but I'm talking about internal. You feel like you're just kind of approaching life, and then all of a sudden you're just like, whew, I lost it. Where did that go? And a lot of times when I'm in that space, I'm like, if only I would love to identify it as my identity. Like, this is who I am. I'm like smooth sailing girl, right? But it's a double-edged sword, because if you identify that way, then what happens when it goes away? Then goes down goes your self-esteem. So it's like, let's not identify this way, because it's not me, right? It's not who I am. We have life that has its ebbs and flows, ups and downs. To be human is to struggle.
Are you recording?
I am recording.
Okay, I just didn't hear you say I'm recording. So.
Yeah, no, I started it earlier, and I figured I'd cut it out, because we were just having a natural
got
conversation.
it. Sorry.
Yeah, all good. So,
because this is good.
Oh, thank you. Good, it's recording. So, and I double checked. So this chapter is where we take that. It's about the struggle, because we've come to understand that we have two souls. We have the godly soul, we have the animal soul. We have the godly soul, we have the natural soul, right? Those are our two souls. And it would be nice if...
Do we have the godly soul 24/7 with us?
Always.
Okay.
The way we talked a little bit about this in chapter 2, but I'm very happy to bring it into context. We receive our natural soul, our animal soul, the moment we're born. We receive our animal soul, our natural soul, the moment we're born. It's an enlivening soul. That's why when a baby's crying, they're not worried about how it's affecting the house. They have that survival instinct, that healthy survival instinct. That's their natural soul. Remember, our natural soul is not negative. It just is. It exists, but it exists for itself. It's all about self-preservation. That's the baby's cry, self-preservation, survival. And then, when the baby's named, actually, by its Brit Milah for a boy, or when it's named for a girl, it receives that first, level of its godly soul. And throughout life, more and more of our godly soul becomes apparent in our existence. Bar bat mitzvah is a big milestone with godly soul. And that's why when a child becomes bar or bat mitzvah, they then become responsible for Jewish practice, because now it has an even playing field. It's got a more embodied godly soul, so that now it can be part of the game. And it is a game. Because if we were to not struggle, we would be robots. We would be spiritual robots. And we are not. We are given free choice. And the free choice comes to be by us having our godly soul and our natural soul to create that tug of war. And that's where we're getting at. So, just want to check. Okay. So, in chapter 1, we talked about that there's 3 different types of people. But really, these types of people are different levels of embodiment of the godly soul. So we have the tzaddik, the righteous man, the rasha, the simply translated as wicked, but very, very much not wicked, just very imperfect, and the Beinoni, which is what this book is all about. It's about us trying to become a Beinoni. A Beinoni means middle, from the word Bain, but it is when somebody's actions are pretty much perfect, nevertheless, they still struggle. So let's talk about the tzaddik for a minute. This chapter actually spends most of its time talking about the righteous man. This chapter and next chapter, he's giving us a little taste of the righteous man, because then we can understand what is that, and then we'll be able to understand where we are. So the righteous man is somebody who doesn't struggle at all. Trying to make sense of my order. So I'm going to backtrack again. When we talk about the godly soul and the animal soul, what are its motivations? What is the motivation of the animal soul? What is the motivation of the godly soul? This, we talked about the transparent and the opaque. The godly soul wants to be transparent. It wants to be a vehicle for God. And it wants the body to be following its lead. And the animal soul wants to exist, just like the baby, but it never graduates. It never grows up. It never matures out of that. It just becomes more sophisticated about existence, more sophisticated about self-perpetuation. It wants to exist, and it wants to take up space, and it wants to enjoy and improve and everything about itself. I keep losing my notes. Okay. So when we struggle, we're struggling about who are we? Who am I? What is myself? Is myself the self of the godly soul, or is myself the self of my natural soul? The natural soul, and it's all about the motivation. Because the natural soul and the godly soul are leading to many times a similar action. For example, this morning when I was eating breakfast and I had something to eat and I was preparing the Tanya, so I was trying to be mindful. And I'm like, okay, so am I eating this cookie because I need the energy to teach Tanya, or am I eating it because I really I'm in the mood of a cookie? And it was interesting because the way the animal soul and the godly soul, it's tricky to figure it out. So the way the godly soul works is that it's top down. Mind, this is chapter 3, mind controls heart. If it makes sense, then we can then want it. Animal soul says, I want it. Does it make sense? So I ate the cookie. I was trying to, and then later on I'm like feeling a little bit of a blood sugar spike. And I'm like, okay, that was probably rationalization. Because if I were to really be listening to my godly soul, it probably wouldn't have led me to eat a cookie for a class that's going to make me spike and crash. So it was an interesting, moment I had of self-reflection. But my point is that you can be doing the same action. A godly soul is going to lead us to eat too, because it wants to be here to perform mitzvahs and to connect to God. But the motivation is different. And it brought to me the example being that I'm a teacher, and that's what that's a lot of times what I'm spending my day figuring out is when you're lesson planning. You can plan a lesson where, you can come to a classroom and the kids are playing, and for example, we have one of our days of Judah camp. They're going to go to the beach and they're going to play in the sand, right? So somebody from the outside can look at them playing in the sand and say, okay, it's very nice that they're having recess time, but it's not really relevant to the lesson plan. It's kind of disjointed. You come to a classroom and you see kindergartners, putting blocks, and then you see them, mixing up some sort of concoction. You can think, okay, they're doing all these things, but it's not going to be relevant to the ABCs lesson they're doing. Or you could have a lesson that every part of the lesson is all part of the same curriculum objective or learning objective or developmental objective. It's all part of that objective. So for example, we're going to be going to the beach and pretending like we're slaves in Egypt, and it's going to be right after they've learned something about that, and then they're going to just sort of act it out. And and then they're going to be doing other activities where it might look like they're just playing, but it's all part of that objective. So objective and motivation and intent matters. And I'm going to put it into context for you. Because remember, it's all about aspects. Sometimes it's about the objective, sometimes it's about the motivation, right? So the animal soul and the godly soul want opposite objectives. The animal soul wants to feel and embody its own existence. It actually does not want to accept God into its life. It scares it, it freaks it out. Like, I just want to be. I just want to enjoy. I just want to, like, just live a regular mundane life. You can live a decent life, right? You don't have to hurt anybody being a regular natural human being. The godly soul says, no. This is about God. I came down to this world not to be a human. It's like, this is a very temporary, unnatural thing for me. I'm here to do mitzvahs and that's it. So it's completely from a different motivation. And we're caught in the middle. The body is caught in the middle. And that's where we get compared kind of like to a small city. And it's like two kings, and it's on the page, one of the pages. There's a highlight on the top of the page that says in Hebrew, Uleum mileum ye'ematz. And that is a quote from the Torah with the story of Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau. Rebecca was carrying the twins, and she wasn't sure what was going on inside of her. She's feeling, kicking at some point and kicking at another point, and it just felt unnatural. And she goes to the wise men, and the wise man says to her, you have two nations within you. You have Jacob and you have Esau. You have Yaakov and Esau. And they are opposites, and they want opposite things. And the wise man prophesizes that these children will be born and grow up and father two nations that will be always in conflict. And either one nation will be on top or the other nation will be on top. That's the prophecy about the world. We have two nations within ourselves as well on a personal level, on a microcosm. And that is our godly soul and our animal soul. They are constantly at war for control over our body. Remember, we talked about the mind, heart, and then actions as being expressions of the mind and heart. 3 intellectual faculties, 7 emotional faculties. So I've touched upon that our animal soul does heart, mind rationalization, and our godly soul does mind, heart, control, intent, and then, kind of engineering emotions and then action. Top down, out. So that's why our godly soul is embodied in the mind, in the brain. And our natural soul is embodied in the heart. That's like, if there could be one part of our body where it's most connected to, it would be godly soul mind, animal soul heart. However, the godly soul also has a spot in the heart. Our heart has a left ventricle and a right ventricle. So according to the Tanya, and this is not physical, it's not like if you were to do, somebody would need heart surgery and they operate on the left ventricle and all of a sudden their godly soul or their animal soul is going to be affected. It's not like the parts of the brain, the physical parts of the brain that literally do affect. Like if somebody has an operation on, this part or that part, it will affect speech or whatever it is. It's not like that. It's a spiritual idea. The left side of the heart relates to the animal soul, and the right side of the heart relates to the godly soul.
Left animal.
Yes. And they are in conflict. They both want to do the exact same thing, but opposite. The godly soul wants to have its mind produce emotions of love and fear for God that will then naturally produce actions that are completely in line with God. It's kind of like when I thought of when you have an argument with with somebody, you know, I'll have an argument with my husband, and I'll say, it's not that you said that, it's that you thought that, right? It's like, if the words come out, it's reflecting a thought, right? So the godly soul wants that every single one of the limb's actions will be completely reflective of what it's thinking about and feeling about. And the animal soul wants the exact same thing on the other side. Except the animal soul has this weird thing with the heart and mind where it wants something and it rationalizes it, and then boom, it eats the cookie, right? And then it's like, right, animal soul won that moment. Fine, I'll give it to the animal soul. But it can't be both at the same time. They do not want to share power. It's like the operating system of a computer. It's either on Mac operating system or it's on PC. It's not both at the same time. And even though I've done weird I'm not tech at all, but I remember doing this in different places where they put a Mac operating system. I used to do it to connect. Now I remember. I used to do it to connect to my school's computer at home. I had a Mac, so I used to do like some sort of software that it would basically take over. The PC would take over my Mac so that I could connect to the server of my school's computer system, right? But I couldn't be Mac at the same time. When I did that, my computer was taken over by PC, and all of a sudden my screen looked like a PC, right? But I couldn't share. I couldn't be like, okay, let me just like go to, my notes app while I'm working on, PC. No, right? It's either PC or it's Mac. That's how it works with the godly soul and animal soul. Our actions are either embodied by our animal soul, or it's embodied and it's, flowing from our godly motivation. And that's why I talked about the classroom motivation, because it's about the war is a war of motivation.
I think you can balance it.
Hold the thought, okay? So just because I wanted to explain this motivation idea. So the actions can look the same, right? Both the godly soul and animal soul want us to eat so that we could. Well, the motivations are different. What's the so that? Why is the animal soul eating? To enjoy. Why is the godly soul eating?
To survive.
To have energy, right? To serve Hashem, to do a mitzvah. Sometimes the eating itself is a mitzvah, right? So it's doing similar actions a lot of the time. A godly soul is probably not going to steal, but the godly soul will eat, right? Most of the actions are the same, but the motivation is where the struggle, that's where the war lies. And that's why you can see somebody going about life, right? I many times go about life and I'm not where there's struggle going on inside of me, right? But you can't always see it from the outside. That's the human condition. Sometimes we do feel embodied. Sometimes we feel flow. And that's how we opened the class. We said, do you ever feel like you're in flow? But then it's elusive, right? It's not permanent. Because as human beings, we struggle. Most of us are wired to achieve the Beinoni experience, which is a struggle experience. But let's go back to the metaphor of the city. So underneath that, where it says, Ule'um mile'um ye'ematz, the top of the page, one nation shall prevail over the other. Then it starts to explain how the body is called a small city. So we're at the second major paragraph of that page. The two souls, in relation to one's body, are just as two kings who wage over a city, which each wishes to capture and dominate each even against its will, and to rule with consent of the populace. That is to say, each king wishes to direct its inhabitants according to his will so that they obey him in all that he decrees upon him. So that's our body. Our body are subjects of this king, and the king is the soul. The king wants to rule over our body. Our limbs do not have a will of their own. Whose will are they going to follow? The godly soul or the animal soul? And that's where that struggle is. What are they going to do? Right? and the struggle is so nuanced, like with the cookie. Like, is it godly soul or is it animal soul? Sometimes it's hard to tell. But if we really meditate, a lot of times we do know. We do know. It's just there's a lot of noise, and it takes a lot of focus and concentration to find that truth that we know. And we also can get guidance from the outside with mentors to help us figure it out. I had a dilemma last year. Am I going to go to my sister's l'chaim, her engagement party in New York, or am I going to stay home because it was a end of the year celebration for Musia's school? And we had just traveled, and there was a whole bunch of reasons why not. And I had to actually figure out what's the right thing to do. And I believe I did come to the right answer, because as soon as I found it, it felt correct. Not to say that it was easy, but for that moment, it was correct for me to stay. Because when I zeroed in on that decision, when I tried it on for size and said, okay, I'm going to stay, I felt aligned with my purpose. And that's not to say that a different time with different, pieces of the picture, it would have been right for me to go. Because sometimes, what is the self that we are embodying? Is it the godly self that exists for a higher purpose, or is it a self that's all it is, just a self? And so what I felt was that if I were to go to my sister's l'chaim, simply because there was the conflict, not because it's a wonderful thing to do, but it would be fun for me. It would be for me, for just literally for my sister didn't need me, my parents didn't need me, nobody needed me there. It was for me. And whereas when I stayed home, I felt at peace that I am a mother, and I will be, maybe it's painful to not be having the fun, but I will be a selfless self. It's nuanced, though. I don't want to say that it's not correct. If I felt differently, if I felt like I need to go to my sister's wedding, otherwise I will feel cut off from the family and it was more intense, then maybe it would have been correct for me to go. I'm not saying that it wasn't black and white at all, but I'm talking about it because 2 points I'm bringing across. I felt the peace, and I felt a quality of like a certain truth that I admitted to myself, that going to the engagement party would have been a selfish thing to do in that scenario. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, and there's a story that I read about a rabbi who there's 2 seders, so I like the story because it's, seasonal. So there's 2 seders. There's 2 Passover seders, night 1, night 2. Night 1, he was all inspired and uplifted, and he felt like he was accessing awareness of spirituality and totally plugged in. And then he was tired the next day. He fell asleep, and he woke up late for the second Seder, and he got up, and it was almost midnight, and he did the Seder, and he just like did it. And then he was so disappointed, like, it wasn't what it was supposed to be. I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't geschmack is the Yiddish word. It wasn't didn't hit the spot. And he comes to his mentor, and his mentor tells him, okay, so you had a really enlightened first Seder, but your second Seder was good too. You're well down on yourself, but you had a perfectly good Seder. So why am I telling you this story? Because for the godly soul, a lot of times it's easy to think it's about how spiritual it feels. But the godly soul is not about how it feels. It's about what is the goal? What is the purpose? Is the purpose to perform the mitzvahs of the Seder? Your feelings have nothing to do with that, right? It's for God. So from the godly soul's perspective, the second Seder was no less than the first Seder. He didn't necessarily enjoy it. It didn't feel as much of a high, but he did the Seder. He did it, and in a way he was even more plugged into the purpose of the Seder, which is to eat the matzah, to read the story. It was simple and on point. And again, it's nuanced. It's not to say that it's not a wonderful thing to meditate and to feel spiritual experience, but I'm going back to that motivation, right? The objective of the classroom. What is the point? And I'm using different examples to show that it's about the point. So one of the examples was to show that that this first example is to show it's not about how much we enjoy it. Even a spiritual enjoyment is about how much I'm enjoying it. It's about Hashem, the mitzvah. And then I used another example to show about I'm going to try to remember my train of thought, to show about the motivation of the cookie. That it's not about if I ate it or not. It's about why was I going to eat it? Was I going to eat it for energy for the class or because it was delicious? Because I was in the mood. And I like I said before, I dare say it was really because I was in the mood, and it was a rationalization. It's going to give me energy for the class. But if it was really the right choice for the class, I probably would have chosen something with a little bit more balanced if it was really about the energy for the class. But let's say it really was about the class, then it would have been fine to eat the cookie. So it's a nuanced thing. It's about the motivation. And the engagement party also about the motivation. If my motivation for going to the party was because I felt like I would really, really need that to be a full person, to be a good mother, for my, not to be a shell of a person, to feel like, because other times I would have chosen to go. Engagement party as well, had a different party, and I knew very much clearly that I needed to go. It was not going to harm anybody a lot. And for me to feel like a full person, as a family unit, that a full embodied, joyous person, it was the right thing. It was for my godly self. It was to be a full self, right? So it's nuanced, and that's where we have to do, please. No, and
to stay awake and concentrate and absorb this.
And your truth.
And
your truth. And this is not and the cookies. It's not about healthy or weight. We're talking about from a godly soul's perspective, right? So, and that for you, this is an experience that is a holistic experience for you. You come to the class, you enjoy it's part of the godly soul experience. It's nuanced. It's not the same for everybody. It's not even the same for you every time, right? It's about what's the process on a process level. What's the motivation? What's going on between the conflict inside of you? Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? Is it the self that exists just for itself? Or is it the self that exists as a conduit and as a vehicle for more? Does that make sense? So the tzaddik embodies this idea of more than the self to an extreme. In the war of the city, the godly soul won the war. They don't struggle anymore. They have 2 steps of their victory. And some tzaddiks stay on the first step of the victory. We're going to talk about this more next week again. And some tzaddiks take it to a complete victory. So the first level of victory is where the godly soul completely subjugates the animal soul and says, you can stay here, but my rules, my motivation wins. All right? My way or the highway. You stay here, but it's my way or the highway, right? You're not going to get to start, noticing, look at that. Well, my track. And we do that with our kids sometimes, right? We're like, we're going to the store, but we're getting these things. Don't even try, right? You can come with me, but... So that's like the godly soul. That's the tzaddik, the righteous man, is able to inspire a love. And so I first gave it to you with the more technical, with the example, and now with looping it back to the actual experience of mind, heart, action. So the tzaddik is meditating. They're producing a love, a fiery love that is yearning. We've talked about this a few times, and we will keep coming back to the love of God and the fire and the water and all that throughout the entire Tanya. And they have this fiery love of yearning for God. and it translates to the actions completely being aligned with that. Then there's another level of tzaddik, and the second level of tzaddik is that they are meditating, they're feeling this fiery love of God, and then all of a sudden the fire reaches over to the left ventricle and channels the natural love that the animal soul has for itself, just a natural, like, self-love, and channels it towards God as well. So they have transformed. We've talked about the idea of transformation in chapter 6 a tiny bit, where we said that the Rebbe was big into this idea of transformation of the world, right? The tzaddik is the only one that's able to transform themselves internally to a permanent point. And that's why if you turn to the next page, the next highlighted section says, Bechol levavcha, from the Shema, Bechol levavecha uvechol nafshecha. So, lev in Hebrew is heart. Why is it say levavecha? Why two vets? It should say libcha, your heart. So the commentaries say that levavecha is for the two shnei yitzrecha, the two souls. And a lot of times, have you ever heard the term yetzer hara, yetzer tov? Yetzer tov, yetzer hara. So the yetzer tov is the motivation aspect of our godly soul, that like voice aspect of it, and the yetzer hara is that motivation of the voice aspect of the animal soul.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. So the yetzer tov, yetzer hara. So the yetzer tov means good. So it's a good inclination, evil inclination. Remember, we talked about evil being basically selfish inclination. So the good inclination is the voice of our godly soul. And the yetzer hara is the voice of our animal soul. The tzaddik is serving God bechol levavecha, two vets to represent the two hearts. In other words, he's serving God with the right ventricle, the godly spot, the godly soul spot of the heart, and the animal soul spot of the heart. And in Kabbalistic, like with the Tanya goes on to explain that the type of love we're going to analyze different types of love later in the Tanya, so we're not going to get caught up on it. But as a spoiler, the fiery love is the right side of the heart, which is a yearning for God, and it's still about it's the love from far to close, and it's still kind of a little bit about that person's enjoyment, but because it's like, I want to get close to God. And then the left side, this is like, leave it if it's not jiving with you, because it's really going to be talked about again and again, and not the main point of this chapter. But the left side is more of a natural, because of our natural self-love that we have. It takes over that natural ability, and it literally completely transforms it from being selfish to being totally about God in a very natural way. Like, I just am a vehicle, and that's it. And they stay there. The tzaddik stays there.
So it's not the fiery love, the natural
They're
love?
both. They have the fiery love, and then the one that is completely transformed. So there's two types of tzaddiks. There's one that subjugates the animal soul, says you can come along but my way, and then there's the full tzaddik, which transforms their yetzer hara, their evil inclination, to a good inclination, where it's literally on the same team. They've literally changed it, transformed it. And they've got two working for it. So it's a very, very, that's like as high as a person can reach. And we have tzaddikim, we have righteous people in our history that reached this level. The famous one is King David. King David reached this level. Many of our righteous people, we can assume Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, most of our major heroes of the Torah have reached this level of tzaddik. And that is the reason why we approach them with a level of reverence. we approach them, they were human beings that lived and breathed and ate and slept. However, back to the motivation, their motivations were not like ours. And when we read the stories of the Torah, we approach their lives and their choices that they made with that level of respect, where we trust that the choices that they made, and they made mistakes, but the mistakes that they made weren't the same process level of our mistakes. It was on a different planes of consciousness. And there's many, many, many stories of the Torah that the Rebbe actually goes back and explains from this consciousness. So, for example, the story of Abraham and Sarah with the sending away. I mean, it's a classes in and of itself. But it's about, or the story of Esau and how, why did Isaac want to bless Esau? Didn't he know he was wicked? Right? But he was connected to a certain level of Esau's soul. So it's really their decisions that they made. It might appear from the basic words of the Torah to be relatable. Like, okay, he liked him better. He loved, Jacob loved Joseph more than the other brothers. It looks kind of like very mundane, very, very, very human,
Family.
right? Family feud type of thing. But since we know that they were righteous, we now approach their lives with the understanding that there's more to the story. And they make their choices based on a different level of consciousness. And the mistakes that they made were a different consciousness type of mistake. It was because they were connected to this aspect of godliness and not that aspect of godliness, and they could have been more aligned with that aspect of godliness. You understand where I'm going with this? It's different. That's the tzaddik's life. A regular person who struggles and makes mistakes is called a rasha. Not because he's evil, but because he's imperfect. And that person is ruled pretty much by the animal soul. The animal soul calls the shots most of the time. That's not to say that the godly soul doesn't have a voice. It does, and it has a powerful voice, and we listen to that voice. But in chapter 11, we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like on a day-to-day basis of the Rasha's life and how we live. I'm saying we. Maybe you're not like me. But that's how I live, right? Where my animal soul's eating cookies, right? I mean, it's doing it. It's doing it. So it means that it has a dominant voice. And I should correct myself. It's eating cookies for a selfish motivation. That's what makes it animal soul dominated. Eating cookies for a godly motivation is godly. It's not about the cookie, and it's not even about enjoying it. It's about the motivation of why. Okay, what's your why? There's one thing I want to conclude with, and it's quite cool. Any questions before?
Well, how you're judging the motivation, right? What if you're wrong? What if you ate the cookie so that you could have energy to teach us this morning?
I think Liat started to say something that would be the answer. Parts, right? But I don't know, because the Tanya says that it's really one or the other that is leading the day. I think it's because I know. And you know what? You make a very good point, because we do sometimes think we know ourselves and then we don't. Sometimes, I should have said
someone else.
Exactly, and that's where we get some mentorship. We get somebody from the outside that helps us make sense of it. I have it for, like I had it with my kids' schooling. Do I do this for their school? Do I do that for the school? And it was about, I needed the guidance, because it was like, it was about my motivation. Why am I doing this? And I needed help figuring it out. Am I making their school choices because something about me, or is it about them? And that's where I got the guidance. That's why I reached out for guidance. I am assuming, honestly, that about the cookie, because that's how it feels inside of me. Not to say that I can't err on myself, because we do that as humans, and we second guess, and sometimes we're more aligned than we even think we are. But I am just going to make that assumption about myself, because it felt later on like, we could have done better,
It starts sounding almost like a little bit of beating oneself up. And you've got to be careful of
You
that.
have to, you're right. You have to be careful about that. And that comes in later chapters of the Tanya. Talks just about that. And that's where I tried to channel that. I did. And I said to myself, okay, I ate the cookie. So be it. Now use the energy. Now use the energy.
And do good things.
Yeah, and do good things with it. There's a Yetzer Hara. Speaking of Yetzer Hara, there's a huge Yetzer Hara. Like, it has a certain tactic where it uses our mistakes against us to get us down. And when we're down, I know about myself that, you can use it with dieting, right? You ate one back to cookies. You ate one, candy. Oh, I already messed up. I might as well just eat the whole tray, right? That's the Yetzer Hara that uses our mistakes against us. Yeah.
No, I feel like
And when I was thinking of bringing up the cookie, I was thinking it might be a risky example because of that, because I wasn't fully sure even what's happening. But that's the human experience, and that's why I decided to use the example, because it's the human experience. I'm thinking, I was thinking to myself this morning, let me try to apply this in my life, and I realized, oh my God, I really am struggling. Should I do it? Should I not? Should I do it? Where is this coming from? And that's the human experience. And sometimes we're more plugged into the struggle, sometimes less, but the human experience is to struggle and is to have that conflict and have that dilemma. That's a human experience.
To produce what eventually?
Whoa, I swallowed air. I'm sorry.
We're watching Gedona and I passed the idea.
That's so exciting, Rachalea. Wow.
And Esther Cal was the only Marshallock girl that got a trophy. She got bronze.
Congratulations to Rachalea.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that was me. I'm good, but better now. Remind me what you said.
The struggle, all struggles are trying to achieve a higher self. Is that what the struggle is?
Yes, and the struggle is about achieving the higher self, meaning something, and that's actually segueing up to the conclusion of this chapter,
Okay.
which is that there is what the godly soul and the animal soul mirror each other, and that's what King Solomon said, and we talked about it in chapter 6. Zeh l'umat zeh, this opposite that, vis-a-vis. There's one difference. The godly soul really, truly, its real motivation, its drive is to cleave to God. It comes from God. It's been put here for a purpose to accomplish something, and all back to God. That's where it wants to be. That's where its natural habitat. The animal soul looks like it really wants self-perpetuation, but remember, why do we have an animal soul to begin with? If God wanted us to live embodied spiritual lives, why did he give us an animal soul?
Because to live in the physical world, you have to deal with the animal soul. That's your surviving instinct.
Exactly, and God wanted us to live in a physical world and do physical mitzvot, otherwise we would have stayed angels, or we would have stayed as pieces or just aspects of God existence. So in order to have that physical mitzvah doing experience, we need an animal soul. So the animal soul really is a servant of God. So the animal soul, its true motivation is to challenge us to get closer to God. In order to challenge us, it does a good job challenging us. It's very convincing. It's kind of like, this is not a perfect example because teachers are not animal souls, but it's kind of like when a teacher puts a challenge, challenges the class. And I experience this. Sometimes I give them a really hard question, and I play devil's advocate in in a discussion that we're having, and I'm trying to be really convincing devil's advocate, but I really, really, really want them to think and come up with the answer and come up with the understanding that we're getting at. right? So that's the animal soul is a challenger. That's really what it is. The challenge is a convincing challenge. And it looks like the motivation is real, because otherwise it wouldn't be a convincing challenge. But its real motivation is the same as the godly soul, actually. It also is there for a purpose, which is to get us to come to God from a place of free choice. Does that make sense to you?
I think if you know how to control it and balance it, otherwise you will lose, like you can lose yourself.
What do you
That's
mean
how
by
you
lose
become
yourself?
Rasha, right? You let the animal soul control you, that's how you become Rasha. Like you make
Because
mistakes.
it's so convincing, exactly.
It does, because it's self again. That's why you have, like, not to be too, how you say in English, egoist?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. The animal soul, like we talked about, is the ego.
Exactly.
And
So
only a righteous person, like we talked about this chapter, can really transform their ego to be about God, like naturally about God. A regular person like me and you's ego is alive and kicking, and that's where we came back to the beginning of the class where we said, have you ever been in a place of flow, right? You know, have you ever been in a place where you feel like you're more or less altruistic, and then, or you're more or less, you know, in touch with the self that you feel more proud of, and then all of a sudden your ego comes back, it gets activated, it gets triggered, right? Because it's not going anywhere. Most of us aren't righteous. That's a rare thing. So that's what we mean by to be human is to struggle. Our ego isn't going anywhere. It's here to stay, and it's here to constantly challenge us. Because without the ego, it wouldn't be a challenge. The motivation of the ego, the true motivation, is something that only the tzaddik is going to really get in touch with and really get to appreciate and experience. We know about it, and that can help us, put context into the world, to life we live, and the world we live in. I don't know that we're ever going to be able to experience that motivation of our challenging soul, because the tzaddik is the one that gets to transform that and say, oh, it really was about God the whole time. Most of us are just going to be like knowing about it. It's really about God. And this challenging thing, it's really a test. It's really a challenge. And I can do this. So it's like a little bit of a motivating idea that we can use to motivate ourselves when the challenge is challenging. Does that make sense?
I feel so much better now, like, because I felt before, I was struggling, but with myself, just myself, within myself. And now that I know that there is this conflict, but it comes from above, and that it's challenging, on an everyday basis, I feel much better to deal with it.
Yeah.
That's life.
It's engineered that way.
Yes, but it's a different perspective.
Mm.
A very different, shifting perspective.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's not poor you going through a rough time.
Exactly.
This is part of how we were manufactured to be.
Yes. And this week particularly, especially let's say with Purim and whatever, and I really tried to tune into that idea of the struggle is normal, because it was comforting to me. Like your experience, your expressed, it's comforting to me that it's normal that it's a struggle to be calm in a stressful environment. It's normal, it's normal that, in a day that there's a party, not everything's going to be perfect. Like all these, to have compassion for ourselves and our struggle, right?
That ego saying,
Right?
Yes.
you should be doing better,
Mhm.
or
Yes.
it should be this or that.
And that's where it comes back to what you said about the Yetzer Hara getting us down through our own mistakes. Like, we make mistakes. We're not perfect. That we struggle, and it's a human thing to, come on. Like, the ego is convincing. The ego, it's hard. Like, we get triggered, and oh my God, like, it's normal to get triggered. It's normal to lose composure when things are that triggering and escalating. does that mean I can't do better? Of course I can do better, but I can have compassion for my experience being a normal one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that, I'd love to take us to a meditation.
I'm gonna.
Yeah, sure. We can all close our eyes. And we're going to start breathing into our limbs. Let's start with our head. We're going to breathe into our forehead. Breathe out. Inhale. Feel the breath enter your throat area. Feel the breath in your chest. Inhale into your shoulders. Inhale into your heart space. Inhale into your arms. Feel the breath in your fingertips, all the way from your arms down to your fingertips. Feel the breath in your back. Feel the muscles of your back release and let go as it makes space for the air. Feel the breath in your stomach. Feel your stomach expand. And then slowly exhale as the breath leaves and let it go. Feel the breath in your legs. Let go of any tension you're holding in your legs, in your feet, in your toes. And now, as you inhale, feel the breath enter your entire body, from your head, your chest, your heart, your stomach and back, your legs, your feet, your toes. Inhale and feel the entire body expand. Exhale, feel the entire body let go, release. And as you continue to breathe, start to feel your body a little bit lighter. Maybe you start to feel the sensation of floating. Feel your entire body as a vehicle, a neutral vehicle. It accepts the breath, it lets the breath go. Imagine your limbs as a vehicle for your soul. Which soul? Align yourself, or become aware, I should say, become aware of your consciousness. You have two consciousnesses. You might visualize them as being in different parts of your body. You might visualize them as energy. You might hear voices of your consciousness. you have a consciousness of your existence. You also have a consciousness that there's more. Now feel into your consciousness. You might feel a sense of, who am I? You might feel a sense of that there's a part of you that is more than you even understand. It elevates, it rises. Visualize your consciousness leading your body and instructing it as a vehicle for its objective. Your consciousness can be a natural one, as a natural human being doing natural things, like going to sleep, waking up, having breakfast, reading a book. And you might become aware of your transcending consciousness, an elevating, almost elusive but not, consciousness that reminds you that there is more. And now, imagine this elevating, rising consciousness instruct your body to go to sleep, to wake up in the morning, to eat breakfast. But the sleeping, your sleep is not just sleep, it's more. When you wake up in the morning, you have a sense of purpose. There's more. You might say the Modeh Ani, align yourself with your purpose for the day. You prepare breakfast. You visualize your food as being energy for your purpose. You might recite a blessing to align yourself with that purpose. And as you're eating breakfast, you're visualizing the energy reach every part of your body as a vehicle for more, for a divine purpose that you know is yours for your life today. Feel out the experience. What does it feel like for you? And when you feel ready to, open your eyes and integrate your experience with your present.
Your voice is so relaxing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Literally, I could feel my body in a minute.
Yeah.
I didn't want
Thank
to.
you.
Me neither.
Well, good that you took the time. Thank you for coming and for being part of it.